You're listening to 2021 Presidential Hackathon International Track Station. This event is organized by Executive Yuan, implemented by Ministry of Economic Affairs, executed by National Association of Small and Medium Enterprises. This is your host, Ronghua Mi. This year's international track theme is Sustainability 2.0, Climate Action. The audience has been followed up climate change would probably associate this challenge theme with United Nations Climate Change Conference and COP26, which is scheduled to be held in Glasgow later of this year. Today we have a special guest from National Science and Technology Center for Disaster Reduction, aka NCDR, Dr. Hsin-Chi. Welcome, Doctor.
Hello everyone, my name is Hsin-Chi Li. I work at the National Science Technology Center for almost over 15 years. I belong to the Climate Change Division, also the Policy and Socioeconomic Divisions. I'm glad to participate in these activities today.
Thank you for being here today, Dr. Li. So I think to begin with, it's rather safe to ask you to introduce us with NCDR's mission.
Okay, NCDR has been established in the 2003 for nearly 20 years. Okay, there are some major tasks. First one we call the technology support and information sharing. NCDR have different disaster-oriented divisions, including meteorology, slopland, hydrology, and earthquake, and also the climate change divisions. Each division has its own R&D task. We also build a cross-sectoral information platform that our results can be provided to various ministries for disaster prevention applications. And the other task we call the emergency support, especially for the CEOC, we call the Central Emergency Operation Centers. For example, when a typhoon may attack Taiwan, the CEOC will be activated, and the various disaster authorities such as Central Weather Bureau, Water Resource Agencies, Council of Agriculture, and also NCDR will be stationed in the center to make preparedness for typhoon prevention together. We keep close collaboration with different ministries during disaster events to synergize joint effort on reducing adverse impact brought by typhoon or other natural disasters such as floods or earthquake.
I see. So climate change is a very broad disciplinary, from natural science to finance, from applied science to humanity. Among many categories, I believe to the general people, it's very common to mix concepts of adaptation and mitigation. So before we travel further, can you help us with a clear and easy to understand definition of adaptation and mitigation respectively?
Okay, to put it simply, climate actions are all about mitigating the manageable and adapting to the inevitable, which means we must do our best to reduce man-made greenhouse gas emissions to suppress further warming and more severe climate change impact. As for extreme events and cascading impact that we are already experiencing almost every year, are very likely to face in the near future. We need to adapt in a more flexible and resilient approach on top of existing measures. We used to think that we can just mitigate as hard as we can solve all problems. But seeing climate change is already at our doorstep, adaptation has become equally, if not more important.
I see. I would like to follow up your explanation with existing concept of on disaster prevention. So NCDR has been established over 20 years. I believe the disaster reduction and emergency preparedness to mitigate the adverse impact is its core initiation. So as far as for climate, what's the difference between disaster prevention and response and climate adaptation?
Okay, it is a good question. If we distinguish by different time period, disaster prevention usually refers to the risk from the past to present, and the climate adaptation mostly discusses the future risk. For the disaster prevention, it usually involves current or near-term risk, and the risk analysis is based on data of historical record and the past disaster event. On the other hand, climate change adaptation we call it CCA not only have to use the historical data and the climate change projection data, is mean future scenario in the 30 or 50 years, is also have to be utilized to evaluate the impact that the climate change might bring to our societies, industries, or many other aspects to our lives. We then will move on to the response, the actions, to see how we can change our current system or way of doing to reduce the potential future risk or explore the benefit and the opportunities that come with those impacts.
I see. So as you mentioned about those natural impacts and updated historical impacts by natural disaster, news indicates the world's largest iceberg breaks off in Antarctica in this May, and while Arctic's last ice area is melting earlier than expected. It seems regardless of how much effort NCDR and many other organizations put, climate change, its speed is much faster than humans' work in progress. So what do you think about this as a scientist and a policy practitioner?
Okay, it is true that we are not keeping up with the speed of changing climate. However, examples also suggest that changing can happen swiftly if we work together. The pandemic is an unfortunate but very good example in demonstrating how humans react to the global crisis. There are lessons learned from the COVID-19 to help fight climate change. Everyone has a role to play, however small it might be. To foster global actions, we must find ways to collaborate based on the best available science, protect the vulnerable, and keep learning. That's important. Always keep learning and adapting for a very uncertain tomorrow.
Well said. We need to be humble facing nature and the consequences we have made. As far as I understand, one of the consequences that ice shed melted, the sea level will rise. Well, and it's rising. There are some cities or island countries are inevitably facing the risk of submergence. Taking Taipei City, for example, will it be someday submerged underwater, probably in our lifetime?
Yeah, I agree that sea level rising is a very special issue. But to be honest, Taipei City is not a very good example to talk about the impact of a sea level rise because it is well protected by from the 6 meter to 12-meter high artificial riverbank, which means the return period of the 200 is as design standard. It means to protect very big river flooding that only happen once in 200 years. As long as these will remain intact, it's my unlikely that Taipei City will be directly affected by the sea level rise. Also, in addition, the artificial protections are also very common throughout the whole Taiwan coast. So the other country also be safe. So under that scenarios.
Well, that's very good to know. So thank you, Dr. Lee. Today we got clarified the difference between climate adaptation and mitigation. We learned that a particular anomaly of a particular event was because of climate change, which accumulated by humans' long-term disturbance. So last question to Dr. Lee for today. We know that several major categories of global artificial CO2 emission come from electricity, industry, and transportation. Assume this is a fact, with implementing cleaner technologies from individual helps, for example, by choosing electric vehicles rather than fuel vehicles, would this be a part of our long-term strategy?
Actually, regardless of the difficulty of implementations, because every policy have difficulties. But for me, as long as it is environmental friendly, it is a policy worth working on. That's my opinions.
I see. So under the Paris Agreement, countries submitted intended nationally determined contributions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions every 5 years to ratchet up ambition to mitigate climate change. Climate change is something happening. We all live within it. Yet there's hope. Our actions today impact our common tomorrow. Next episode, we're going to talk about how information helps us to get ready for the best, the worst, and most likely scenarios. International track application will close on August 4th at 3 p.m. So if you're inspired by NCDR and Dr. Lee's sharing, you're strongly encouraged to start your application by visiting Presidential Hackathon International Track event website. 2021 Presidential Hackathon International Track, Hacking for Climate!